Welcome to the Achieve It podcast, hosted by marketing coach, journalist, technologist, and Speaker Hall of Fame member Terry Brock. Get ready to discover new and interesting ways to reach and connect with customers as Terry and his guests dive into the world of technology, marketing, relationship building, productivity, and other ideas that will help you achieve your entrepreneurial dreams. And now, here's your host, a fun and smart guy with a really good haircut, Terry Brock.
You know, one of the ways to communicate today that is really hot is called podcasting. You've probably heard about it. It's something that gives you the ability to take the spoken word or you can put some video with it from time to time as well and reach literally thousands, millions. And also what we're really interested in here is making money, how you're going to be able to do it and make a living with this and how to do it. I got to say, I'm a guy who's been, you know me, I'm the journalist. We sit back in journalism and go, yeah, right. Sure. You know, and I've been thinking podcasting is okay, but there's a bazillion people out there doing it. I think that's the exact number, a bazillion, and there's no room for it. Well, there is. And now I have to say I'm in it and getting things going. And today, literally today as we're recording it, getting podcast out, a new episode, putting it out there. And I have got a special treat for you. I've got a buddy of mine who is working with podcasting. He, in fact, is in charge of a big event here in Orlando called Podfest. He's going to tell us about what's going on. Chris Krimitsos. Wait a minute, I'm saying that wrong. I'll make sure I get it right. Krimitsos. And Chris.
Perfect. Thank you, Terry.
Excuse me for doing that, but welcome aboard. Glad to have you here with us.
No, glad for having me on. I'm excited to talk about podcasting and kind of the world of on-demand audio, because that's kind of how I look at it. I know people know the term podcasting, but it's on-demand, searchable audio.
I like that, on-demand, because you get it when you want. Well, Chris, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background, kind of in a nutshell here, and what you do and how you help people.
So my background is someone that really enjoys creating communities and bringing people together. So I've done that in different phases, but my wife pointed this out. I've always been fascinated by technology and innovation. For whatever reason, I remember when those little AOL cards, Prodigy, I was of the generation that we were getting the cards, we were getting on the internet, trying to figure out how to use these things. The webcams were separate, you know, they didn't come with the computer, but I just remember my cousin buying modems, and we couldn't believe that, you know, the speed of the internet, now things have accelerated. But even back then I was like, whatever this is, it's going to revolutionize my entire life. I just knew that. I just didn't know necessarily how. And 10 years ago, you know, time flies, but even more than 10 years ago, I started teaching local classes in Tampa to help people with social media. And I created e-marketing groups, and we started doing a lot of workshops. And I remember early on, I featured a speaker by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk that no one knew. No one knew who he was back then because he was talking about wine. But I was like, this guy's onto something.
Wine library.
Yeah, his speaking fee, Terry, was $0. I just bought a couple books, and you got to see him. And I had to educate the crowd why they need to come see this guy. I put censored on the thing because I knew he was going to curse, which most speakers don't. You know,
Gary Vaynerchuk curse? Really? Yeah. Oh my! You're shocking me here.
He's toned it down now, but back then every other word, he literally probably 1 out of 3. So he taught everybody about social media, and he became the world authority on it as an influencer. And I remember saying to my wife, you know, I didn't realize the value of the education I was bringing to a local environment. I could have had a huge conference back then teaching social media, but I thought there was someone like me in every community. There wasn't. And I said to my wife, you know what, next time I see something that's growing that I really enjoy, I'm going to allow it to grow where it needs to grow. And I caught on to, we were doing these meetups. So I was learning about all kinds of stuff throughout the whole time, and we were tinkering with everything, but someone taught about podcasting, and a lot of my speaker friends were in Blog Talk Radio. I knew that had no legs, but this one gentleman, this kid was like, hey, do you mind if I talk about podcasting? I'm like, what kind of podcasting? He goes, you know, like on iTunes. I'm like, yes, I'd love to hear how that works. And he taught it, and he said, hey, I have a student that just bought one of my courses, and he's doing pretty well. I said, what's your student's name? He goes, his name is John Lee Dumas. He started this thing called Entrepreneur on Fire. And this was literally within the first 6 months. So kind of like you, Terry, I'm like, oh, let me do some investigative work. And I just see this kid just take off. And I said, something's going on with listeners, and there wasn't enough content at the time. Went home to my wife and why are you so excited? I go, I'm going to start a podcast. She goes, about what? I go, I don't know. I'm excited. I just want to start a podcast. Now, we had our first podcasting fight. My wife said, I want to start a podcast. And it turned out she had a much better niche than me. I didn't have clarity. Her clarity was, I'd like to inspire women all over the world and have a podcast that interviews women. So I went online
Nice.
thinking there's going to be 20, 30 different shows. This was about 6 years ago. There was not one show of a woman interviewing other business women. So I mean, maybe there was one and they had just stopped. So she created Biz Women Rock, and she was one of 3 women that became some of the largest leaders in the space.
Very
And then
nice.
I said, let's do some workshops. We did those workshops. Long story short, they turned into Podfest. And year 1, we had 100 people. Year 2, we had 183. Year 3, we had 373. Year 4, we had 496. This past year, the hotel that's right around the corner from your house, we had 975 registered. And this year, we're expecting over 2,000 attendees. And we teach the gamut of this on-demand audio world, as well as YouTube conferences. And we do a lot of different multimedia education.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on there, and I can see that it is a place where you want to be, particularly if you're a thought leader, if you're a communicator, a speaker like you and I are, or someone who's communicating. But what do you see happening out there in the world today? What kind of fields are growing and some of the trends that are the strongest in podcasting?
So this past Saturday, I got up at 2:58 a.m. and I started writing, and it was based on that question, what you just said. So I was like, let me write about the niches that we've helped create. And one of my biggest frustration points, Terry, is people like, oh, that's really nice. You have some locals that get together. And I'm like, no. This is so much bigger than, I know you've seen it, but I always tell them, I go, this is not, Terry might be local. Let's say he lives in Florida, but he's an international commodity, let's say. And here's what we've had localized people launch that I could name off the top of my head. We had one guy create the drone radio show. He's top 5 influencers in the world as for drones. Another guy likes golf, so he created the private club radio show. Now, remember, a lot of podcasters called their shows early on radio because they got tired of explaining to people what a podcast was. So when they called it radio, people were like, oh, I get what it is. We had a Medicare expert create Medicare Expert. We had someone that has colon cancer create the colon cancer podcast. And then he realized there was no one else talking about cancer, so he expanded it to We Have Cancer podcast. We have the kid-friendly network for all the stuff for children, women's meditation network. So to answer your question, the niches are wide open across all boards. And if you're in a crowded niche, so let's say we're talking to someone that's a leadership speaker, you could play with format. And in format, you could find a niche that already exists within the general space. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say you want to talk about business. Well, business happens to be one of the most crowded fields on podcasting, but you might want to package your business. You might want to package it in a minute. You might want to, so now that's a really great skill for Alexa and Google Mini, as well as a podcast. So it's all about your format. So you could tweak the format to find a niche in a crowded space. So there's just,
yeah, you can customize it to what's going to work for you. That's the nice thing
Correct.
about it, that it's not just you got to do this, but now there's a niche on just about anything out there.
Yeah, we have a guy that puts people to sleep. He does a podcast called Sleep With Me. And his niche is he creates bedtime stories that make no sense on purpose. And then when you listen to it, for the overactive people, your brain starts saying to you, this is really stupid. I don't even know why I'm listening. And magically what it does is it starts shutting down all the overactive compartments in your head and makes you focus on this dumb story that makes no sense, and then you pass out.
I love it.
He has 4,000 people on Patreon that give him money every month.
Wow. See, that is beautiful. It gives opportunities. And I think it's so much better than what we have. Chris, one of the things that we have here in Orlando is we have people come on the radio and they tell us, oh, bad thing happened over here on the west side of town or on the east side. This is terrible. Oh, and the knuckleheads in Washington are doing this bad thing. And oh, stupid thing happened overseas and da-da-da-da. And I'm thinking, why am I listening to this in the morning? Why am I wasting my time on something that's not going to be valuable to me later that afternoon? Certainly not a year from now or whatever, versus I get my wonderful little headphones on. I grab my smartphone. I've got an Android and I got an iPhone, and I'll use both and use that for a podcast. And I'll find something that is really good, and I can listen to it and be devoid of it. It seems like, Chris, there's huge opportunities out there. It seems that way. What do you think?
It's not even huge. We went from a world that was controlled by a few corporations and messengers, let's say. And I always tell people, I know you've done this, but I ask people, have you ever done any media or press in the 90s or early 2000s? People say, yeah. I go, when you went to the radio station and TV station, what's the first thing you encountered? And they say to me, security. I go, why did they have security? And they look at me with a blank stare. I go, the information was so valuable and the airwaves were so restricted and the monopoly was so powerful. They had security to keep you out of the building. I go, now they're so scared because you and I right now at the comfort of my office, your house, we're right now communicating. What was locked up to the few is now opened up to the many. So that opens up. I always tell people, imagine a huge star exploded and created millions of stars. That's what's happened with the online space and the on-demand revolution, whether it's video or audio. And we're only seeing, I really think, Terry, we're at the edge of space. The expansion is going to be so big. I just don't think we could even grasp how big it is. So I saw a guy went on, he came into our group and he goes, I just went hiking on the mighty Blue Appalachian Trail. So he started a show about his hike. Then someone else said, why don't you create a network for people that are doing hikes and need more information? Now he owns the hiking network. He owns 3-4 shows for hikers all across the world.
Nice. It really is taking off and going far. Well, let me ask you this then. Somebody's watching this or they're listening to this because we're going to be going out in video and in audio. It's wonderful that we can do that today. And then think, okay, I'm thinking about getting into it. You've convinced me, Chris. Terry, you and two got me thinking I want to do it. How would they find out where there's, number one, their area of expertise, and then two, the kind of trends that you see going along and what you see as hot?
So, yeah, so let me give you some simple, these are really tools and tips you probably won't hear with a lot of people. And this is very simple, but it's very accurate. You're going to go to iTunes. If someone can't access iTunes, literally, they probably have the icon on their iPhone or they could download iTunes. But you want to go to a directory like iTunes or Overcast if you're Droid or Google Podcast. And you want to type in the keyword that you think represents your niche. And you want to see what shows are already represented. In iTunes especially, there's a button called Related. And when you click on a show, you click on the Related button. It also will tell you what other shows are related. Now, the interesting thing about iTunes SEO, it doesn't work like Google, where Google's very intuitive. And I'll give you an example. We had a gentleman that had a show called 21st Century Fathers. When I look up fathers in iTunes, shows about priests come up. So his show was mischaracterized, and we were doing some work with him. I said, did you ever consider calling it Dad to Dad, the Dad to Dad podcast?
Nice.
And he said, no. He was a little more formal. He goes, well, we know as fathers. I go, today's world, people are searching the dad. The dad is the keyword. So when you change the name of your show or the name is related to the other shows, what happens is your audience finds other shows similar, and then iTunes says, hey, based on your name, we think these listeners that listen to these other podcasts with a similar name should be listening to you. And it gets served up as what I would call listeners also listen to, and then it shows suggestions. So you
sounds
want
like kind of Amazon said, if you bought this product, you probably would like this.
Much more similar to an Amazon type thing. So than a Google search. So that's one of the ways I would tell people to search. And one of the biggest things that I see people making huge mistakes, they fall in love with like a name and they test it against their friends. And I unless your friend is someone like me or someone that does this for a living, I'd be very careful at getting their feedback about the name of a show. Because I met a really nice young lady in DC, and she's a really good event planner. She's like, I'm going to do an event planning podcast. Great. What are you going to call it? And she named it after her dog or something, right?
Oh,
and I said, well,
charming.
Yeah. And her friends were like, that's a great idea. Friends, they're going to tell you that. They care about you, and they don't know any difference. They just want to support what you're doing.
Yeah.
I said to her, why don't you just call it the, whatever her name was, event planning podcast? And she said, well, there's a lot out there. I go, there's a reason for there's a lot out there. The same person that listens to one might listen to all 5, and you're going to get traffic. But I said, the name that you have now, I could guarantee you're not going to get anyone except your friends, and they're not going to last that long. So you want to make sure that you're keywording your niche. And there's a lot of space when you say what's hot. iTunes just broke up their categories into subcategories. So let's say business has a marketing, has a management. So now there's all these, like there's 20 or 30 subcategories under business. So just like Amazon, you could actually target a subcategory to be one of the top 100 in there. And that'll help you with an audience that's looking under that subcategory.
Yeah, you know, like what you're saying there, I think is really important. Those of you listening right now, if you're listening to this wondering, gee, where should I go? Think about that. What Chris just said is what I heard in the MBA program. You find the niche, and things start out big, and then they start getting niche, and you can make the riches in the niches. I mean, it's an old saying that we've heard, but find that niche where you have the expertise, and there's a market demand of people that are ready, willing, and able to pay. Because ultimately you've got to monetize, unless you're saying, hey, I'm doing it just for the fun of it. And that's a whole different thing. But Chris, I think you're right on target with that. Now, before we started recording, you said you you were kind enough to bring some slides and some things you had to show what's going on. Tell us a little bit about what you got there as you share your screen with us here on Zoom as we go into that.
All right. So I have just a couple of slides I want to share. Let me make it full screen. So this is just a picture of Podfest, but that gentleman is John Lee Dumas right there. And he started EO on Fire. So let me just use this as an example, Terry. This is an interesting case study. Everybody wants to be him. He's the #1 influencer for not necessarily entrepreneurs, wantrepreneurs. When you ask him who his target is, it's wantrepreneurs. And when you ask them why that is, they have a lot of money to buy products and services as they're learning. So that is his target. But the reason why he became very famous, just like Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, he was the first business podcaster to say, I think there's a demand for daily content. And he was told by all the other podcasters at the time, that's impossible. People can't consume more than 1 episode a week. So when he started a daily, so he was a format change is why he got big. He started his show 7 days a week. Here's what's happened. All those people that morning needed something entrepreneurial daily. He picked up that audience overnight.
Yeah, the people on their morning commute, they're in the train and they got to take, or they're driving that hour to work or whatever.
Yeah, so that's, let's see here. This is the kid-friendly joke of the day. So this is an interesting case study. I was doing some consulting in the family-friendly niche, and I noticed that humor is one of the largest things people listen to in podcasting, but there was nothing for children. So I went home to my wife and I said, I gave them this great idea, kid-friendly. The client did something else, which was fine. It wasn't what I advised them. And I said, I really think this kid-friendly joke of the day is a big idea. And she goes, well, why don't you do it? I said, well, you know, Katie, I don't have time. And she goes, when have you ever let excuses stand in your way? My wife is she's phenomenal. I said, okay, you got a good point. She goes, why don't you just put it out to the world and see what happens? Well, I went to my meeting. We have a local meeting. And we have an unemployed comedian, and all his jokes do not land with adults, but 4-year-olds love them. So I said to this gentleman, I said, would you like to produce some jokes for me? He goes, sure. So I hired him, and he produced the joke of the day. Within our first day, we had 500 downloads, not because of my reach, because people were actually, iTunes does not release their search algorithm like Google. So it was an educated guess. If I create something called kid-friendly joke of the day, it would have a reach. So now this gets thousands a week of people playing for their children. That's the niche. So it's adults that play for their children as they drive them to daycare. And then, as you could tell, we expanded it across all kinds of shows.
That is nice. Question, how would someone monetize that?
So the way I created this is monetized because across this network, every week, the episodes average somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 downloads. So then if you can hit 5,000 downloads a show, this is for generalized content. So I want to be very clear, not a niche play. Niche play, you can make a lot more money. I would then go to an agent. There's agents that represent advertisers that cater to children. And they would say, we'll give you $30 per 1,000 downloads per month. So let's say monthly, I average 20 or 30,000 downloads. I would get paid something like $500 or $600 to put an ad in front of these, and it would only grow as the show grows, but that would help cover my costs.
Thank you.
Now, if you're niche, and you mentioned this, if you were niche, we have had people that represent very B2B niches, which I love when people say, will it work for my B2B niche? I have a gentleman that represents government contractors, and he is a government contracting officer, and he has gotten over $3,000 an episode for under 500 downloads an episode because the audience he was targeting was so niche. It was worth quite a bit to people that wanted to be in front of those ears.
Nice.
This is what I said earlier. Distribution now is open to all. So Apple is in the game, Disney Plus is in the game, but now you're going to see, I don't know if you saw this, but Tinder, the dating app, is playing with creating content. I mean, you're going to see all kinds of they're struggling to get attention. Here's the report. They're creating original content to keep people's attention. So the game is in the content. And this is the example I gave Terry. This is your example. You said this, the niches are in the riches. I always get people wanting to be Gary Vee, and I always say, do you know how he started? This is when we featured him back in the day. He started selling wine. I mean, he started a niche, then expanded out when the opportunity presented.
He started with what he knew because he worked with his father there in the liquor store. He knew wine. He thought, hey, somebody might want to know this. So he's saying, this wine is good. This one's not quite so good. This one's really good, and it's a bargain this week. La, la, la. They sold more wine. They did very well financially. And then he took that and expanded. So if you're watching this or you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do? Think about Gary Vee. He started when nobody knew what he was doing. Nobody knew him really at a large scale, but he did what he knew best. He worked with that, kept working, hustling like crazy, working hard, and he was able to succeed.
His videos early on, I remember I used to watch them. They'd get 200 or 300 views, and then over time they'd get 1,000. But he understood that his videos were getting cataloged, and over time he understood the long game. Rachel Ray, and I'll flip this quickly, but people know her as a home brand. What they don't realize is her niche when she started was 30 minutes with Rachel Ray. It was a time in our popular culture where women did not want to make mac and cheese for their kids anymore, and they wanted to make something of quality, but they only had 30 minutes. So I always tell people, here's someone that you know as a home brand, but she started with a very specific niche, 30-minute meals with Rachel Ray. This next case study makes me feel old. When I share Ellen DeGeneres, I'll ask crowds, how did she start? And now I get people, she started as a sitcom star. And I realize, like, wow, I'm a generation older than others. I'm like, I remember her on Carson, and people remember her as sitcom. Yeah, that was on. So pick your battles and pick your niche. This is the microphone I'm using right now, Terry, and it's a really good microphone. And the reason why we recommend it is it has a USB enable. So I plug it right into my computer, and it works. I turn it on and everything works, and I use Zoom.
Yeah, works very nicely.
All right, so I want to show you some case studies. This is a really great one. This is someone that found a format change. So my wife created the Meditation for Women Network, and there was a lot of meditation podcasts out there. And this is for anyone in the health and wellness niche. Speakers should really be paying attention to this. When you looked at the meditation niche on podcasts, it looked very crowded, but what she realized was no one was titling these podcasts for women, today's women. So she has shatter imposter syndrome, or get rid of your headache. I know it sounds simple, but all the other ones were very like float into the ether. She was like, let's create titles that could relate to women. And then the other thing she did in her format is she started with the intention. And speakers do this a lot when they're on stage, but she says, hey, on this meditation, I want to make sure you understand the intention. I want you X, Y, Z. And then she starts the meditation.
Nice.
This is now one of the largest meditations. A year and a half later, she makes a full-time living off of this thing. She has ads that go in front of it from sponsors that just want a female demographic. I can't really give her numbers, but it's a lot. It's in the thousands weekly, and it's growing 10% week over week as we speak right now.
And so the reality is, even though we don't know the exact numbers, this is something you can use and make a living at it. If you work at it enough, there's the possibility to do that. And the thing I see, Chris, is all these different examples. It shows there's opportunity out there. You've got to be creative. Think about what's working. Not only what a lot of people are doing, maybe that's not where you want to be, but maybe a niche within that niche that's going to be something where you have people who are ready, willing, and able to buy what you're selling and what you can offer.
Well, I can share that her past podcast, Biz Women Rock, and she shared this publicly. She was we have 2 daughters. I want to make sure Katie's first priority is our daughter. So she would then have 30 hours a week, and she's very strict with her time. I really respect how she uses her time. She was making close to just under $100,000 a year on consulting revenue out of the house without ever having to leave, never speaking. I mean, literally zero speaking, consulting people from the house, from her podcast into her group. Now, she did want to do something that would help women subconscious, and this spoke to her. So she actually sunsetted that podcast. Now she does this full time. This will surpass that eventually. And the interesting thing about this, it's all passive income. She only creates 1 podcast a week, and then everything else is turnkey. You could buy them on Amazon, these meditations. And then she has like a $7 or $10 course on her on her website. All right, let me show you something that could deal. This is a good one. This is a gentleman that was an NSA member, Bill Oxier, a good friend of mine. He's a healthcare CEO, C-level executive, and he created a leadership podcast. And we said to him, Bill, you're competing with some of the most famous leadership authors like John Maxwell and all these guys out there. You need to really niche down. So he said, well, I know about healthcare, and I know there's a need for people in the rural hospital groups that need help. So he created Rural Health Leadership Radio.
Wow. There's a good
one,
niche.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Terry, this one took off. He's the biggest expert, obviously, in hospitals in the country, in America, but also in Australia. So those are his two big things. And then he had I can't really share, but it was over six-figure deal offered to head a huge group because of his podcast. And it got him more speaking gigs than when he was just a leadership podcaster. So
very nice. I see his Dr. Bill, is that doctor, is a medical doctor?
I don't think so. I think he probably doctorate college, but he's a phenomenal human being, and he's a healthcare CEO kind of guy. That's the world he lives in.
It seems like what he's done is what others have done that you're talking about here. They found something, they step back and they think, what am I good at? Where do I have expertise in an area that people will value? And then they get out there, they go for it, they take the plunge and make it happen. And we learn as we go. Because I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I would think you've made a few mistakes, like I know I've made a bunch of them. But we learn from those mistakes and we don't let that stop us. We pick up, we learn from them, and we move forward.
We don't make mistakes. We just try different things and see what works, right?
There you go. That's right.
As Katie would say, we're knowledge sponge. Now, this is the related field, Terry, I was telling you about. So on an iTunes page, you see where it says related? When we click on that related button, do you see the keyword that pops out at us when we're looking across spectrum?
Yeah, the related, sure. And the arrow pointing to it.
But yeah, the related, but you see that here, these are the other shows. You see the word that pops
right
out?
there. The listener also subscribed to.
Yeah, and it says rural across each one. So if you were to ask me and I were to guess, I would never guess that rural was a keyword that people queue into. So Bill did some research. He saw that rural tends to be something people are searching, and he stepped in front of that traffic, and there was no one with the leadership niche there. So that's what I mean. Like, I would never guess that rural is a keyword. I just wouldn't. But when it tells me what the keyword is right there in front of me.
Yeah, and you're watching this right now. You're listening to this. Think about what Chris just said. They found a keyword, rural. Hey, that jumps out. And you think, well, nobody's there. Wait a minute. Put them all together. Use a medium like podcasting that can reach them all. And now you've got a sizable market.
And Terry, I mean, I know you've done a lot of studying, and I have too. A lot of people don't realize when you go to like a food court, they've done math on this. If you have more choices, the food court is busier. So what people don't realize sometimes, like, oh, someone's in my niche, I shouldn't go in there. Actually, it's quite the opposite. If you see 4 or 5 shows in your niche, that means there's probably a healthy listener audience looking for new things within that niche. So don't get, I see this all too often. Oh, people are already in my niche. Well, did you listen to the shows? They might not even be that good. And you might come in and do some extra work, and that audience is looking for a new person to listen to in that niche. So just understand that it's good to have other choices within the same niche, and the audience loves it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is really good. And Chris, I'd love to stay here and talk with you like for hours and hours, but I'm not going to let you get away without telling us about how people can tap into it. I got to say, before you say anything, I went to Podfest last year here in Orlando. It was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. I'm going this year. I have paid my registration fee. I'm looking forward to being there, and it's going to be good. So, Chris, I'm going to reach through the screen here. Twist your arm just a little bit. Tell us how someone can get involved in Podfest, and they can get active in coming to that, learning about the community.
So 2 things. I want to make sure we have anyone that needs help wherever you are. And if you can't make it, join our group on Facebook. Just type in the word Podfest. We actually shortened it. We will help you throughout the year. No problem. Thanks to Terry, who's helping us spread the word. And the other way you could basically find us is podfestexpo.com. And at that, you'll see our website, and you could basically purchase a ticket to attend Podfest. We have 3 levels of tickets. We have our inner circle, our VIP, and our creator pass. If you're looking to get into YouTube, I highly recommend the VIP because it also includes VidFest, which is a YouTube specific conference that happens at Podfest as well. But just go to podfestexpo.com, and we have 200 speakers and I think over 150 tracks of learning. And we've broken up the tracks to beginners. So if you don't know anything, we have a beginner track to get you started. We have audience building. We have industry for people that work with corporate America and they want to learn more on the industry side. We have a video track. We have a wildcard track. So a lot of that on Audible, self-publishing, SEO. And then we also have an audio drama storytelling track. So a lot of people need to learn how to paint with words. And we found some really amazing artists that could talk about improv, voice training, things that you wouldn't see at a normal conference. And we really go deep dive into it.
Excellent. Well, Chris, I really look forward to seeing you there. Matter of fact, go ahead, if you don't mind, break out of your sharing screen right here. Come back so we can see your smiling face on there on the screen. But and those that are watching this, you're watching this and thinking, okay, I've heard a little bit about what this is. I've heard about podcasting. This is a place where you want to be. You're going to wish that you had. I remember many people fought against microcomputers. That's what we called them way back long ago. I got in that thought, hey, this looks like it's going to go somewhere. Jumped into it, put in my time, money, and energy in order to learn it. And well, it created the lifestyle that I have now, bouncing around the planet, 44 countries so far, and speaking in countries around the world, doing the kind of lifestyle that I want. And really, that's what it comes down to. Money is good. I'm a stark raving capitalist and believe in free market and helping people. And as you help others, you will get what you want, as Zig Ziglar told us. The key is lifestyle, the freedom that you have to live your life your way. Podfest is a place you can come. You got people, I was blown away at how gracious and how kind people were. I'd say, I don't know about this. And like 2 or 3 people would go, oh, we can help you. And I'm thinking, I like this. This is a good place here. And I would encourage you listening to this, look into it, look up the website, see what it is. Chris, any final words that you want to leave with those that are listening to this, thinking about getting into podcasting, thinking about coming to Podfest? What would you say to them?
I've been playing in this space for 15 years. I've created a place that I would want if I was trying to learn. So it's about the community, it's about the camaraderie, and it's about the education. If you're looking for a home that is community-centered first, where we're there to help one another up the ladder of success in this online environment, then come to Podfest. We grow every year because friends like you that attend it tell other people. So there's something special about it. We want to make sure that you get what you need, but literally my wife and I have looked at our lives and we want to spend more time with our family, and we've created vehicles that will help us leverage our skills. And I want to help. When my wife is sleeping, this is the crazy part, and you know this, Terry, when my wife is sleeping, 1,000 people every day download the art that she creates. Imagine if you have a message and you fall asleep and 100 people or 50 people, it doesn't really matter because it's scalable, however many it is. So if you want to get your message out, or you want to learn, if you want to get on some really great platforms, you might bounce into someone that has a show that could use your talents. I mean, you know, everybody's there. If 20 years ago I said to you, everybody you see on TV and everybody you hear on the radio is in one room, would you show up to meet them? That's what this is.
Yeah, that's a smart business move. Well, Chris Krimitsos, we appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you, dear listener, for being with us. And I encourage you to get involved with this, see what it is, check it out, see what's going on. I'm Terry Brock with terrybrock.com. Thanks for being here.